Digestion. Digestion is simply the process of breaking up food, and food, of course, includes all those things we talked about, the proteins, the fats, the lipids, the vitamins, the minerals, and all the things that we eat. Breaking up food into usable building blocks. And extracting energy. That's really the two things that we want food for. We want energy, but we also need to use it as building blocks. So imagine Lego, right? If you have a tower made of Lego that your little sister made, and you want to build a Lego house, you're going to have to disassemble her tower and turn it into a house by putting the Legos together in a different way. And so the molecules in the food we eat have to be sometimes somewhat disassembled and reassembled into the things that we need them for. So proteins, for instance, are made of many amino acids. Well, maybe we don't want those proteins in that particular order or arrangement, are those amino acids, so we digest it, break it down, and use the amino acids to build new proteins that our body needs and wants to use. So that's the building blocks, right? And then, of course, the extracting energy has to do with the glucose metabolism. And so if we're talking about breaking things up, we should learn some fancier words. So there's a word called metabolism. And it's a big word. You hear that a lot. You often hear when you're talking about fad diets and exercise and health, and they'll talk about, you know, this particular vitamin in kale can boost your metabolism. And a lot of that is bunk, to be honest, because your metabolism is very tightly regulated by your body. And there are certain foods that will have an effect on metabolism, but usually it's not because of the food, it's because of something that your body is trying to do. So what metabolism is it's a big word, and it refers to all the biochemical processes. In other words, the biochemical reactions in an organism or a living thing. And there's basically two kinds. In an organism, I don't think we need an S on the end there, organism. There's basically two words that can be broken down into, right? So metabolism is broken down into two words. One word is called catabolism, and that's the breaking up of things. So that's when things get broken down into smaller pieces. That's taking apart the Lego to use it for something else. So when things are broken down, we call them catabolic reactions. Digestion of glucose is a catabolic reaction because we're taking a glucose molecule, which looks something like this, in this little model here, right? Something like this if I just stick a carbon in here. Something like that, and we're pulling it all apart into smaller pieces like these, so we can extract the energy that's in the bonds holding these molecules or these atoms together. That's a catabolic process. Break something down, and then anabolism or anabolic processes. Let me write anabolism, catabolism, and anabolism. This is a building up kind of reaction. So this would be taking molecules from our digestion and using them to reassemble into other things. So sometimes, as an example, I'll give you an example in a second. We'll talk about glucose. You may have heard of anabolic steroids. Those are molecules, right? You guys mentioned that. Anabolic steroids, the word anabolic refers to the fact that these steroids are building up muscle tissue. That's kind of their role, right? And whether or not they're good for you is a whole other story. Any kind of steroid has the ability to affect. Well, essentially, your body's a giant biochemical factory, and there are probably hundreds of thousands of biochemical reactions happening within your cells and tissues all the time. And they're all very carefully managed, right? But we've discovered that we can do things to our body that will push them in different directions. So like exercise can push some of our biochemical processes in a particular direction. That's generally good for us. Obviously, too much could be bad, right? It's like a balance. And next year, you'll have a whole unit called homeostasis, which is studying the balance that your body tries to achieve. All right? So anabolic steroids, we've discovered if we take them, we can build bigger muscle, but we also discovered there are some pretty extreme side effects because they affect other biochemical processes too. And these steroids are very similar to the sex hormones like testosterone and estrogen. So our body starts doing weird stuff, like, women will grow hair on their chest, and men can have issues where they lose their sexual potency. They become sterile. And so you got to be careful messing with your body's metabolism, right? There's really no such thing as boosting your metabolism. Your metabolism is an overall set rate, and it's controlled by your brain and glands, your endocrine system primarily. You can do things that can cause your metabolism to increase and decrease, but it's not so much eating foods. It's more activities and lifestyle choices that you make, and it usually means you have to make choices over a long term, right? Eating a little bit of kale for breakfast doesn't mean your metabolism is now revved up for the next hour or something like that. It doesn't work that way. It's a much more long-term adjustment that has to be made. So, for instance, when we take glucose, let me just go back to black here. C6H12O6, that's the molecule of glucose, right? And we've seen its structure is kind of like a hexagon. And there's a little piece up at the top here, and there's H's and OH's sort of attached all around in these points. That's its basic shape. But you'll notice that it has lots of chemical bonds. All these joined areas are bonds, and these bonds are energy. They can be broken, and the energy that's holding them together can be released and used to make other bonds, in particular in the ATP molecule. So what we essentially do in digestion is we break this molecule up into little C's and O's and H2O's and CO2s, essentially. This is what's left when we're finished breaking it all apart. And in the process, we've broken a lot of these bonds. And in doing so, we've released that energy, and that energy allows us to take a molecule called ADP, which stands for adenosine diphosphate, and add a new bond of phosphate, which creates ATP. And so we've taken the energy, so we've disassembled my little sister's Lego tower, and I have built my Lego house, something completely different. And so it's a catabolic process when we break stuff down, and it's an anabolic process when we build stuff up, right? So what we can also do, though, is this is primarily a catabolic process, because when we're finished, we have broken it up into smaller pieces, right? But we can also do an anabolic process. If we don't need energy at a particular moment, then the C6H12O6 can be disassembled and reassembled into bigger molecules, like fats and lipids, for storage, right? And you'll remember how big those molecules were. And so that's more of an anabolic process where we're building up bigger molecules from smaller ones. Or fats and lipids, we can also make starches or glycogen. Remember, we can stick together the glucose molecule. So those are the three big words that we want to just have under our belt. Metabolism, which stands for everything, and then you can divide it up into the breaking up and the building down reactions. The breaking down is the catabolism, or catabolic reactions, And then the anabolism is the building up or the anabolic reactions. Okay. Digestion is primarily a catabolic reaction because we're not making anything. We're breaking things down. So digestion is a catabolic process because we want to take large molecules of food, fats, lipids, proteins, and we want to chop them up into their individual Lego pieces, individual molecules to be rebuilt later for something else, or to extract energy, right? To use the energy of their bonds to produce this molecule, which allows us to store energy. The energy is stored in the bond of that extra phosphate that's attached. So it goes from diphosphate to triphosphate. And that process is quite complex, and you'll learn that next year, all the details of that, the biochemical details. Your whole biology next year starts off, the whole first part of the class is all about biochemistry, and molecules of chemistry and biology. It's interesting, but it's no longer talking about hearts and livers and spleens so much. Okay. How do you do this? Well, if you're a single cell, right? If you're a single cell, you get food particles inside of you in a number of different ways. If the molecules are already small enough that they can be transported through your membrane, you could bring them through the protein gates in your membrane. But if it's a larger object that you want to eat, we've seen that the cell can do the process of phagocytosis, where it wraps itself around the object like this, and eventually, I'll just go over here, eventually it produces a bubble that has this little object inside. And now we have enzymes created by the metabolism of the cell. All inside the cell, there are it's a soup of molecules. And these molecules are engaging in all kinds of reactions. And they are turning into other things and breaking down other things. And so one of the products are what we call protein enzymes that can be shuttled across the membrane, either by passive or active transport, which then interact with the food and begin to attack it. Remember, a digestive enzyme is a protein. It's a catalyst protein that enables reactions to happen. So it enables the breaking down of this food particle. And eventually then, what happens is the food particle is completely broken down inside into all the little pieces. The Legos are disassembled. And then, of course, those little pieces can then be brought back into the cytoplasm, if they're useful, or they can be ejected as waste if they're not useful. That little vacuole or vesicle, whatever you want to call it, then moves back to the edge of the cell, kind of in the reverse process, and then it opens up and it releases the wastes that are no longer necessary. So that's basically how digestion works in a one-celled animal or creature. I shouldn't call it an animal. It's a single-celled organism. Okay? And that's essentially the process of phagocytosis, which we've already talked about. But in a larger multicellular creature, cells are all specialized, and so it's a little bit different. We have to, first of all, get the food inside of us. And so what we have are tissues that have evolved into complex organs, which form what we call the alimentary canal, which is basically a hole that goes through us. What's interesting about this hole is in let's write multicellular. Multicellular organisms have specialized organs and systems to bring food in and digest it. So we have a basic body plan where you have a hole down the middle. So take some worm-like creature, and you cut it in half. There's a hole through the middle. The front end, where the food goes in, is generally called the mouth. And then whatever it eats goes through the alimentary canal and comes out the other end. It's a one-way process, right? And then this would be called the anus, the other end of the process. Now, not all creatures have a tube shape like this. Some creatures work more like this, like, for instance, a sponge or something. It has more of a shape like this. And so what happens is you have food particles go in, they slosh around inside here and do what they do, and then waste particles are ejected back out the exact same way. So it's a slightly different body plan. It does the same job, but it's slightly different. Yeah. Go back? Sure. There, we'll go back there. I'll give you a chance to catch up to me. Okay, caught up. So there are different body plans for different animals, but they all accomplish the same task. They all somehow get food to come into either a space or a cavity like this, or a tube like this one, which travels all the way through the organism. So technically, if you think about it, when you eat food, that food goes into your stomach and through your intestines, but it's not really inside your body. It's really more like a donut. If you imagine a donut, here's a nice, delicious donut, right? And the donut has a hole in the middle. Well, here's the top view of the same donut with the hole in the middle. So if I take a dime and I drop it into the hole and place it right there on the plate, black dime, is the dime inside the donut? Not really. It's in the hole in the space in the middle of the donut, but it's not inside the donut. To get it inside the donut, I have to take my dime and shove it into the dough, right? Like stick it in here. Kind of like when I was a kid, I don't know anymore if they do this, but our mommies, and they'd make cakes for our birthday and they'd put coins in the cake. Anybody ever remember that? You'd eat your piece of cake and there'd be like a quarter wrapped in wax paper inside. It used to be an exciting thing, because back in those days, a quarter could buy me a chocolate bar. So it was exciting. You got a quarter. And in fact, sometimes it was dimes, nickels, or pennies, and that was still good, because if I saved up 6 or 8 pennies, I could go to the store with that, and I could buy 3 or 4 Bazooka Joe bubble gums or something like that. Now you basically need a wheelbarrow full of pennies, so putting coins in a cake kind of fallen out of favor, because, you know, I suppose if they wrapped up $5 bills and stuffed them into the cake, it might be more exciting. Hard to do that. So when we talk about being inside, we have to understand there's a very important distinction to make. Food that passes through our digestive tract isn't really inside of us. It's just inside the donut hole, like this. It just so happens our donut hole is stretched out into a very long tube that winds and twists and turns. But it's still just a hole right through the middle of us for the most part. It starts at the mouth and ends at the anus. It comes out. And that's our digestive tract, or our alimentary canal. Okay. Now we could talk about all the different animals and different things that happen, and there are many different options for how this is laid out. Like I said, you could have this kind of particular sac-like structure where the stuff goes in and out the same place. That's kind of revolting to us, because we don't want to eat through the same hole that we poop out of. But there are animals that do that. Very simple animals usually, like maybe jellyfish and sponges and things like that. Most of the animals that we're familiar with, lions and tigers and bears, oh my, are shaped more of this tube kind of design, right? Where there's one end and another end. A typical earthworm has a very simple digestive tract. So let's talk about an earthworm as an example of one of the most simplest digestive tracts. An earthworm is essentially the picture I just drew. It has a tube inside, but not quite. Let me change that. I'll draw the tube in a different color. Okay. An An earthworm essentially crawls through the earth, and it eats dirt as it goes. So that's how it makes its tunnel. It basically just eats the dirt that it's tunneling through. So if we draw the bottom of the worm and the top of the worm, something like this, what we find is inside there's basically a mouth area where it eats the dirt. And then there's sort of some specialized cells here. And then there's a long tube. And out it comes. And these specialized cells along the alimentary... Okay, ran out of batteries, but I'm back. So the earthworm has specialized cells along its digestive tract that are sort of doing different parts of the job. Remember what the job is number one, break stuff down, catabolize it, and then absorb. So because like the dime in the donut, right? In order to get the dime in the donut, you got to push it into the dough. So we have to find a way to get stuff that's in this red tube to push into the actual tissues of the worm. And the way it's done is food goes in. I'll use green for the food. The food goes in, and it hits this first structure, which essentially, excuse me, is more like a storage area. It's called a crop. So we have this area called the crop, and then this next area is called the stomach. Actually, you don't even call it a stomach. Believe it or not, they're slightly different words because they have slightly different structures. This is called a gizzard, actually. So a gizzard, it's not another name for a stomach. We often use them interchangeably, but it's a sort of a more primitive kind of stomach. You could think of it like that. Anyway, the gizzard, of course, is lined by cells that can secrete those digestive enzymes. Remember the digestive enzymes that the cell was making inside of it? And it let them go into the vesicle where the food was engulfed? Well, it's the same thing here, except all the cells that line this entire area are injecting their digestive enzymes to help break down the food. The gizzard is also lined with muscle tissue, which allows it to contract, and that mixes and turns. So what we have here is two different kinds of digestion going on. In the gizzard, we have what's called physical digestion, which is caused by the grinding and churning and mixing by the stomach muscles, physical digestion. And then we have chemical digestion, which is where the enzymes are enabling the actual breakdown of the molecules. So physical digestion doesn't really break molecules apart. What it does is it separates the food into smaller and smaller chunks. But eventually, those smaller and smaller chunks get down to the size of a few molecules, and that's when the chemical digestion kicks in and then actually pulls apart those individual blocks of Lego in the gizzard. So you can see how the first part of the digestive system is all about breaking down. Then we have a long tube, and what happens all along this long tube is we get the absorption of things that the body's looking for in that food. All those little building blocks can be absorbed into the tissues. Now, how do they get absorbed? Well, you'll have to remember how the circulatory system interfaces with all of the other systems. So wrapped around this tube, which we call like an intestine, is a massive amount of capillaries, right? All nearby. We can't really draw them because they're almost microscopic, but you kind of have to imagine that all around here are blood vessels. And these blood vessels, or capillaries, are where those nutrients are diffusing into. They're going right through the cell membranes of the intestinal wall and right into the capillaries, and then they can be distributed through the bloodstream to every cell in the body. And we have pictures of that in our circulation videos, so we don't need to get into that. And this is the basic plan for digestion, how it works. First, break stuff down, and then we absorb it. But of course, just like anything, if you have a small business, You're the business owner. You got 2 employees who help out and around the store. Maybe you run a corner store. Got a few kids who come in and work the cash register for you after school. It's a small business, and you don't need a lot of extra stuff to run it. But if you have a huge business, like you run Walmart, you need an entire personnel department to handle all the staff. You need a human resources department. You need an entire finance department to work out who to pay when and how to take off income tax and all that complicated stuff. The bigger things get, the more they require add-ons to the system, right? Expansion. And just like that happens with business, it happens with organisms. As we get larger and larger, this system needs some expansion, some add-ons. Humans need more than just this, because we have more stuff going on, and we're going to talk about that now. We'll see how we get from here to sort of the human digestive system, right? So we could go back here and label the mouth if we want, and the anus. Okay, humans also have a tube-based system, but we got a few extra features. We're not like the base model car. We've got, maybe we've got the Sirius XM radio package. We also have the four-wheel drive suspension package. We got a few extras. So let's see how humans work. The human tube. Let's draw ourselves an outline of a human. Here would be a mouth. Little chin. There, that's my best rendition of a human head. Yeah, it's a huge, weird-looking head. Sort of looks kind of like a bird/human/weird thing. And also has this weird forehead that's bulging out. Who knows? So what we have, of course, is a structure here. And in this structure, it's actually complex. There's 3 important things going on. I'm going to try to do all different colors here to show you what's going on here. We have these things called teeth. There's some teeth. In red, I'll extend the bottom. We have this sort of muscular tongue, which is a big muscle in our mouth that is basically just squirming around in there. And then around the mouth, in the parts of the head, we have, let me go purple here, we have a small line, what are called glands that make this liquid called saliva. They're called salivary glands. Okay, I'm gonna label all this for us a little bit later. There's nothing there in your textbook, so I'm not going to worry about it. So we have salivary glands. Glands are tissues who have taken the special job of making particular enzymes and juices for various processes. In this case, to break stuff down. So what they make, of course, is saliva. And saliva is a solution that does a couple of things. First of all, it makes the food mushy and wet, so you can swallow it. If you ever tried to swallow a dry cracker, it's pretty darn hard. So the first thing saliva does is it lubricates food. It lubricates the food to make it easy to pass through. It also contains enzymes. And one of the most important enzymes it contains is an enzyme, I'm going to say contains enzymes. For example, I'll put in brackets, amylase. Almost every enzyme in biochemistry ends with ase. So you know that's what they're talking about. If you see something that ends in ase, if you saw hexokinase, that's an enzyme. It's an enzyme involved in glycolysis. So we have amylase. Amylase's job is to take big starch molecules and break them down into smaller glucose molecules. So it's chemically already starting the chemical digestion in the mouth. Breaks down starches. Remember what a starch is, right? A starch is a whole bunch of glucose molecules stuck together. Or molecules like glucose, different sugar molecules. And this enzyme begins to snip that long chain up as the first part of digestion. So that's the salivary glands. I'll put the purple arrow there to show them. And now there's several of them sort of situated around the mouth. They're not all in one spot. We'll just draw a couple there for the general idea. And they secrete into the mouth from all the various directions around the mouth. We have over here the teeth. Teeth. The teeth, of course, they are physical digestion. That's where that begins. Physical digestion at the teeth. Obviously, the teeth are enabling us to bite off bite-sized pieces of food, right? And of course, to then chew up the food and break it all up into a mushy, sort of pulpy, gooey, globular mess. Right? Our teeth come in various shapes and sizes. If we draw a little picture here of teeth, we have sort of large teeth at the back of our mouth that are kind of flat with little bumps on them. These are molars, right? And then we have, let's draw 3 molars. Then we have teeth that are a little less molar shaped. They only have sort of 2 bumps on them. 1, 2. These ones are more like 4. They have kind of like if you look at the top view of one of these tends to have like a bumpy region, like almost like 4 bumps. Whereas these ones they only have a 2 bump region. And then we have these teeth, we'll draw 2 of them. And then we have these sort of sharp kind of little teeth that are kind of like the fang teeth, right? And then we have 4 little, actually if I draw them to scale, this is the front of your mouth, if this is the bottom of your mouth, let me go back here, we have sort of 1, 2, 3, 4, these are the little sort of front teeth, little bitey teeth at the front, right? And of course, it keeps going around the other side. We have the molars at the back. That's what they're called, the molars. These are the grinders. I'm not going to write every word in on my picture because I don't have room, but you can write in there somewhere. Grinder teeth, they grind. And when you chew, you don't chew up and down. I don't know if you notice this. You chew with a slight circular motion. So your jaw goes around. Now, if you're a giraffe, you can see it. Giraffes chew like that. Right? I don't know what to do. But humans, we do it very subtly. Just a slight movement. And what we're doing, of course, is we are grabbing the food between our molars and moving sideways like this. So we're grinding and chewing and grinding up the food. And the molars, and these other ones here are called the bicuspids, the ones with the 2 bumps, bicuspids. Those are also tearing, ripping teeth. Those are the teeth that if you want to take a piece of toffee and you want to rip off a chunk, you put it kind of in the side of your mouth right here, and you kind of rip from the side, right there. Those are really good grab and rip teeth. So if we want to rip something apart, we hold it in our hands, we stick it in our mouth, and we pull it out kind of to the side of our mouth using those teeth. Then we have the canines, which are the next ones in. Just 1 in this picture, but there's 4 of them all together. These are your fang teeth. If you're a chimpanzee, you have incredibly big canines, right? I'm going to pause for a second. So yeah, the big canines of the chimp for grabbing and holding. So you can write in that those are the grab and hold teeth. We've got the grinders, we've got the tear teeth for ripping and tearing, and we've got the hold on teeth. And then at the very front, we have what are called the incisors, which sounds like scissors because that's exactly what it means. And it's spelled like scissors. The way scissors work is there's 2 blades that pass very close to each other, and they work in a sort of shearing fashion like this. That's why we call scissors shears, right? Scissors work the same way. So these teeth are rather flat and sharp-edged, and they work in a shearing way. So these are the shearing teeth. In other words, these are the teeth that we use if we want to take a piece of celery and bite off a chunk. They snip off chunks of food for us. Incisors are well developed in plant eaters because we're constantly, a giraffe reaches up to the tree and snips off a leaf. Oh, and eats it, snipping. So herbivores tend to have really good incisors, hardly any canines of any kind that matter. They're usually shrunk down to small. And then they have big molars because it's very hard to grind up vegetable matter. Meat doesn't require as much grinding. It's a softer food. Carnivores, as you can see from the chimp skull, have huge canines. Their incisors are well developed because they also use their teeth for defense as well as eating, right? And so, they might nip and bite at people or other chimps for dominance displays and things. And then they have a different kind of a lesser molar that's not quite so intense. A giraffe molar is huge and big and grinding up leaves all the time. Some herbivores, all the molars are fused together into one big tooth, like a plate, and they grind in there. Okay, so every animal has the same teeth, but they're all different sizes and shapes depending on what the animal eats and depending on its evolution and its habits. Like a hippopotamus, for instance, has very big tusk-like canines, right? Inside of its mouth. Okay, so there's the mouth and the teeth for physical digestion. Lastly, in here we have the tongue. The tongue, and the tongue, of course, is also a big part of digestion. It's basically moves food around so that it can move from one set of teeth to the other. If you want to grind, you use your tongue to push food back to your molars. And if you want to snip and tear, you move it forward. So move food around, mix and distribute the saliva. And that's basically one of the jobs of the tongue. Of course, humans have also learned to use the tongue for a totally different job, and that is making shapes and sounds as we speak. And the tongue muscle has been sort of hijacked from being a digestive only type of organ to doing double duty. So it's an organ it's a muscle, I guess, that does both. So there's the first part, the head. That's the first part. And all we've done is gone into the mouth. And we still have a long way to go, but we're going to stop because we're out of time. And in our next video, we'll explore what happens when you swallow this stuff and then where it goes from there.